This week in the business of tech, Brex got out of SMB and left a messy trail. Are those performance reviews really impartial? Is anyone feeling confused about the economy like me? Congress has a busy summer ahead, and a lot of it matters. And the 3 things I noted about Kaseya this week. All these stories and more. Hit those like, subscribe, and notification buttons and help us pay the bills. And here are this week's stories. With yesterday being a federal holiday, I wanted to look at some of the coverage around the federal employees. Axios reported last week on the move away from federal workers being remote. The Office of Management and Budget indicates that the vast majority of workers are back in the office. That said, it's actually not that simple. Here's some examples. The VA reports that they've moved away from maximum telework schedules. Interior says a combination of remote, full-time, or part-time is in the office. Labor reports that employees are working with their supervisors. Energy says schedules vary. The EPA has increased their in-office presence. The SEC says its return to the office is voluntary. And Justice says it's varied across lawyers. And all the while, the House advanced specific legislation strengthening the Fed's telework approach. The proposed law would require agencies to provide 30 days advance notice to Congress and the Office of Personnel Management of any action that would reduce federal workers' access to telework, as well as expand data collection on telework, particularly its cost and environmental benefits. Now, why do we care? There's a vast difference between declaring that you're open and back, which is done for PR, and what you implement in the workplace. Let's observe that sending a message that the government is open and returning normal is one thing, and then dealing with the reality of employees is something entirely different. I'm expecting we'll see even more of this, ahem, Elon Musk recently, where the messaging is different from reality. And that's why we care. The actual reality of what will happen will be a lot more small and individualized, and way more complex than a single byline. Sure, the government has gone back to normal. Sure it has. Amidst all the tough job market reporting, I spotted some data from Pluralsight. In their State of Upskilling 2022 report, 40% of technologists cite a lack of room for career growth as a motivator for leaving their jobs, including opportunities to develop new skills. 87% of the 7,000 respondents said they wanted to improve their tech skills. 61% of tech workers felt too busy to dedicate time to upskilling. Survey respondents identified that as the biggest barrier to development. 18% said that their employer emphasized hiring rather than upskilling existing talent, and the same amount cited a lack of support from their employer. Interestingly, leaders said they're even more likely to feel unsupported by their managers at 27%. Why do we care? Here's a build versus buy mentality. The data here says, look, you don't have to hire the skills you need, you can build them. Too often, employers think the grass is greener with new employees, when instead, upskilling those you have might be a better path. And as the data is saying, the ones you have might leave without that investment. So keep them and make them into what you need them to be. And 2 sets of intriguing work data. A channel company survey of the IT channel. 93% of women feel the hybrid work environment has either had no impact or has positively impacted their career. Only 48% of their male counterparts, however, felt the same. 57% of women said that they had made more sacrifices than their partners over the last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. All the while, the majority of men surveyed, 81%, feel the current work environment has improved for women. And Textio, an augmented writing platform, looked at written job performance feedback. Black men received 68 words of written feedback for every 100 words received by white women. Asian men were 7 times more likely to be called brilliant or genius than Latinx women. On average, women, Black, and Latinx workers received more personality-related feedback, both good and bad, than their colleagues. Women, Black, and Latinx workers also receive less actionable feedback than their male, white, and Asian counterparts. Actionable feedback can provide meaningful guidance for making performance improvements. Now, why do we care? I hope it's pretty obvious. We care because there are distinct areas to work on here. I'll focus on the second set of data. It's a fantasy to think job reviews are blind to race and gender. It may feel that way, but the data doesn't prove that. I highlight this for first, awareness, and second, the observation that investment here can expand your talent pool. If your organization is pushing away people without you knowing it, you should be bothered by this and invest in fixing it as a leader. It's good business. So let's talk about Brex. Have you heard of them? I hadn't, until they appeared everywhere due to shutting down their small business offerings. Brex is a fintech startup that grew from an initial focus on technology startups and larger companies in the corporate spend management space. One of the offerings is corporate credit cards, and they expanded to a financial operating system for companies. 2 years ago, they announced they were going more broadly and adding traditional small businesses to their offerings. And last week, they abandoned the segment. The quote from Protocol: Brex was abandoning smaller, slow-growing businesses because it wanted to focus on its core market of startups. They had discovered they had overreached and notified customers awkwardly that they were firing them as customers. The qualifier is now funding. To be a Brex customer, a business must have venture capital, angel money, or funding from an accelerator. Businesses affected are mostly brick-and-mortar businesses such as bakeries, restaurants, and small design agencies. Quote, it's really, really hard to do both because of the sheer volume, the CEO of Brex told TechCrunch. TechCrunch themselves noted, quote, one can only assume as market conditions have shifted, it no longer wants to take the risk of serving less cash-rich customers as a way to limit their own credit risk. Talk about a fair weather friend, end quote. Why do we care? Let's note that, yes, an enterprise company and an SMB company have very different needs. The reactions have been pretty harsh, especially considering those less cash-rich customers are precisely the ones who need the kinds of services Brex offers. I believe that a business needs to focus on what it can be very good at. Thus, it would make sense for me to praise their focus and get out of a market if they can't serve it. That said, this move has a real stench to it. From a distance, it appears they didn't do their research on the market and did not think about the actual reality of smaller companies who are valuable in bulk. There's a big difference between a volume offering and a boutique one. The big takeaway here is two-part. First, businesses often don't really understand SMB. They are not just smaller versions of big companies. Those that specialize in SMB know this, which leads to the second statement. If you're picking partners for your customers, have some healthy skepticism for those looking at the SMB. If it's not in their DNA, they're likely to be pretty bad at it. I covered the death of Internet Explorer last week. Turns out, that's not entirely true. Oh, it's dead and unsupported, but its legacy goes on. First, in Japan, a large number of companies delayed any actions, and a March survey by information technology resource provider Keyman's Net revealed 49% of respondents saying they use the browser for work. They said the browser was used for employee attendance management, expenses settlement, and other internal tools. In some cases, they have no choice but to use Internet Explorer because of client systems used to handle orders. Over 20% of these respondents did not know or had not figured out how to transition to other browsers after Internet Explorer's retirement. Government agencies there are particularly slow to respond. The portal site for information on government procurement and bidding will switch its recommended browsers to Edge and Google Chrome on Thursday. But for Japan Pension Service, notices concerning online applications must be viewed in Edge's IE mode. The website of a government-backed mutual aid corporation for private schools still listed Internet Explorer as its only recommended browser. And Wired dug into it too. Industry analysis indicates that Internet Explorer may still hold more than 0.5% of the total global browser market share. And in the US, that share may be closer to as much as 2%. Why do we care? I do not have a lot of sympathy for these companies that were appropriately warned. Let me observe that the articles highlighted the flood of calls that are coming in to IT services firms now that there is a crisis. My advice to them would be to charge a premium. Customer bad planning does not make a provider's crisis. Providers are not a charity. Charge for the service. It's a good business. Remember Huntress, the cyber startup that helps MSPs detect footholes and persistent malware? If you haven't checked out their platform recently, it might be time for a fresh look. Huntress has added a ton of new features and functionality to its managed security platform, including EDR capabilities, a powerful next-gen antivirus, ransomware detection, and much, much more. They're on a mission to secure the 99%, those small and mid-market businesses, via IT services companies. Visit huntress.com/MSP Radio to learn more, and more about how they can help you grow your cybersecurity practice, or start a free 21-day trial. The more I spend time reviewing articles about the economy, the less I think anyone has a sense of what's going on. Let's take a bit of a romp through some of the latest reports. IDC is reporting on printer shipments. They're down 2.1% year-on-year for Q1. They also advise that PC shipments are expected to decline 8.2% year-over-year in 2022 to 321.2 million units shipped. Tablets are expected to fall 6.2% in 2022. Tech Isle reporting on PC shipments. SMBs worldwide are likely to purchase 101.2 million units, a 1.9% increase from 2021, revised down from 104.5 million PCs predicted earlier in March. Workforce scarcity at 58% of SMBs, inflation anxiety, 47% of SMBs, recession angst, 41% of SMBs, and ASP, or average selling price increases, of 3.3% to 7.7% quarter on quarter, and increasing investments in non-IT capital equipment are all contributing to the slowdown in PC purchases. Now, let's go broader. Pulling from Axios, noting that despite inflation, some consumer items are getting cheaper. Sporting events are down 11%, for example, but the one to note for IT services is smartphones being 20% cheaper. There's also concern among workers broadly. Axios and Morning Consult are reporting broad increases in the percentage of workers expecting a loss of income in the next 4 weeks, and that's across all income levels. But notable that the fears aren't necessarily lining up with reality. The number of higher income respondents who said they'd actually lost employment income in the prior 4 weeks was just 7%, basically unchanged from May. I also want to highlight a long piece in Vice focused on the impact on the market. I'm going to quote 2 passages. Throughout the macroeconomic profession and monetary policy sphere, people like to elide this point that raising interest rates will somehow magically bring prices down. They don't talk about the mechanisms by which it lowers prices. The way it lowers prices is by reducing household income, specifically by reducing the income households get from labor. The US has had very low interest rates for a very long time, making it easy and inexpensive for companies to borrow money, allowing them to aggressively hire and grow, and encouraging companies and investors to speculate recklessly with that money. This, along with COVID and what employers called a labor shortage, recently increased wages and led to record low unemployment, which workers got to enjoy for like 3 months before inflation started eating into what little gains they made. Now, rising interest rates will probably hurt many people even more. Meanwhile, companies have argued that they need to raise prices because they've had to pay workers more while making record profits. The way you reduce wages is basically through layoffs and pay cuts. When you raise interest rates, you are tightening financial conditions. You are making it harder for businesses to get loans to finance ordinary operations. When it becomes more expensive to borrow money, businesses cut costs in other places, notably labor. When people are laid off, people make less money, so they buy fewer things, so prices go down. There are more people searching for jobs, the labor crisis eases, What little power workers recently gained shifts back to companies, and people have to accept jobs for less money than they've had to in recent years. More or less. And second, I think we should not rule out the possibility of a soft landing. They raise rates now, which prevents further wage growth from adding to existing inflationary pressures. Why do we care? I linger on that Vice piece due to the context and perspective. It could go wrong or it might not. The tea leaves are pretty murky. I'm advising caution because it's never a bad tactics when the waters are so murky. I'm far less worried about the core of IT services than I am about the impact of what customers feel on the services delivered. Take PC shipments, kind of steady. Smartphones are cheaper. The core pieces of technology delivery are fine. It's the labor component for customers to be sensitive to. If they cut there, it's felt by providers. That's the caution, a second-order effect rather than a first. I didn't cover it, but the EU recently passed legislation to require all smartphone manufacturers to stick to a universal charging standard, USB-C. Well, it might happen here in the US too. 3 senators have asked the Commerce Department to develop a strategy to require a standard charging port across all mobile devices. The House also approved an additional $417 million for CISA. The FTC recently reminded companies that principles of fairness and the likelihood of harm may, in some cases, prompt breach notification. This requirement might exist even if state breach notice laws have not been triggered. The FTC emphasized at the same time the need for breach disclosures to be accurate and noted that, quote, regardless of whether a breach notification law applies, a breach entity that fails to disclose information to help parties mitigate responsibly foresee harm may violate Section 5 of the FTC Act. And, in stuff to come, there's a long list Congress is considering before the summer recess. Pulling from Axios. The United States Innovation and Competition Act, designed to strengthen the U.S. chip industry, was initially thought of as an easy win for both parties to boost American tech competitiveness. Also up, the American Innovation and Choice Online Act, the most likely to pass. This Congress spate of tech antitrust bills would significantly change how giants like Apple, Amazon, Google, and Meta do business, by not allowing them to preference their products. Or the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. This one is the comprehensive personal data privacy one. And they are filling the Federal Communication Commission's empty seat. The chair's agenda is stymied without the confirmation of a Democratic commissioner. One did pass the Senate already, the State Antitrust Enforcement Venue Act. This one helps boost antitrust action by allowing state attorneys generals to push within their own systems rather than face moving to faraway federal courts. Why do we care? Europe continues to lead, from privacy laws to charging standards. We've gone from no action to a lot in the US, and we'll see how much gets done before the summer recess. Right now, I'm banking on it being rather significant. Even if half of this gets done, it's enough to impact IT services organizations. Yesterday, I talked about broader economic issues. Today, I want to talk about some of those impacts on work. Zillow, as reported in the Washington Post, with research on home prices. Remote work is fueling suburban home values, rising faster than in urban areas, as laptop working buyers prioritize affordability and larger floor plans over shorter commutes. The rise in suburban home values is a reversal of previous norms and from the first 15 months of the pandemic, according to Zillow. And all that worker unrest? Well, maybe it's bosses too. Quoting from Axios, 70% of C-level executives told Deloitte pollsters that they seriously might resign for a job that better supports their well-being. 83% said they'll expand their company's well-being benefits over the next 1 to 2 years, while 77% said companies should be required to report workforce well-being metrics publicly. 20% of C-suiters said they'd banned after-hours emailing, and 35% said they make employees take breaks during the day. 57% of employees in the Deloitte survey said they were fed up enough to quit, too. And for those employees, there's a disconnect. 84% of C-suite execs said they thought their workers were thriving from a mental health perspective, but only 59% of employees rated their mental health as excellent or good. 91% of the honchos said they saw themselves as caring leaders, but just 56% of workers thought their bosses cared about their well-being. And while talking about work-life balance, a new report focuses on the value Gen Z, those born between 1997 and 2012, place on it. Remember, they'll make up 27% of the workforce in 3 years. The report shows that a generation that prizes family and well-being over money-making isn't afraid to job hop and sees civic participation as vital to advancing their values. On average, they spend about 2 years at a job versus 5 years for Gen X and 8 for boomers. There's a lot more in this report. This data is backed up by specific MSP data in the Evolving Landscape of MSP Business report from Barracuda. 78% said they need to make substantial improvements to address employee well-being. And I spotted a report out of South Africa on the SMB market there. I'll note that that report also says the same thing. 95% of decision makers have experienced stress due to work. Commissioned by Xero, the accounting package, there's a notable focus on accountants as strategic advisors, including a push by 1/3 of customers into online strategy. Now, why do we care? I've started to see some pushback on remote work and employee power, and I'm waiting for the data. It might be there, but then again, people buying homes is a big commitment. It's not going to be given up lightly. I'm going to dwell more on the mental health data here. Delivering IT services can be a pretty grueling job. Support roles are generally binary. Either you're not noticed or you're fighting fires, which isn't easy. With tech workers as hard to find as they are, I'd struggle to see an example of overinvestment here. Labor remains the most expensive portion of the P&L for providers, so why not overinvest here? Out in Las Vegas this week, Kaseya held their Connect IT event, and one product announcement did catch my eye. It's an AI-powered recommendation engine called Cooper that's being added to the company's solutions. It's designed to call attention to product functionality that users are paying for, but not benefiting from. The goal? A 10 to 15% increase in technician efficiency by pointing out the most powerful aspects of the Kaseya kit that customers have but aren't using. The product is scheduled to reach the market in November. Also notable for those tracking, Kaseya closed their acquisition of Datto. I've included a link to Channel EDE's coverage, and I wanted to note one item. Datto Senior VP of Business Development Rob Ray was quoted in the press release, which is generally a sign he's sticking around. Also sticking around is CISO Ryan Weeks. Now, why do we care? The Cooper name for the product is the CEO's dog, so you know. I'm not really sure how I feel about that. 2 reasons to care here. First, among all the announcements, this AI one is the only one I think matters. I want to see this both released and supported before I get too excited. I'll cite Logic Now's Logic Cards as the same idea announced in 2015 that now Enable has long banded as the reason why I'm skeptical. That said, building actual intelligence into the leverage systems will unlock some real power. These will also make service delivery just a bit more commoditized. Don't get me wrong, I'm both excited about the possibility and believe it's the direction the market is demanding. Just know that if the system tells you what to do, it moves more toward commodity. The second reason to care, Kaseya's leadership is writing checks to keep high-profile staff. At a very minimum, acknowledge they see value in those positions and those people. The cynical answer would be that writing a check is to keep any mass exodus at bay. An optimistic explanation is that it's an actual investment in the missions of those roles and people. I'm assured of being right on the first, and only time will tell on the second. Thanks for your time and attention. Time is a finite resource, and I really value you giving me some of yours. If you like this video, you can let me know with a like of the video, and even more valuable, hitting the subscription button. My content is all free, and I use metrics like subscriptions to pay the bills, so it has real value. The content here is produced under ethics guidelines posted at businessof.tech. If you're interested in more content like this, you can get access to content early via our Patreon at patreon.com/MSPradio. It's our give what you want model where you set the value of what you think the content is worth. If you like this podcast, you can catch it daily as the 5-minute news and commentary show, The Business of Tech, available on all your favorite podcatchers with links at businessof.tech. Just hit that big blue button to subscribe. Again, thank you for taking time out of your day to listen, and I really value the interaction. If you want to say something in the comments, I do respond and watch all that, and I look forward to talking to you next time.